Hi, everybody. Good morning and welcome to another episode of Market Movers, November 7, 2025. And we're seeing a lot of headlines in the Philippine market, earnings, peso, the local equities. So today, let's talk about it. So Edmund, kamusta?
Doing well. We're going through earnings season right now,
Yes.
both in the US and in the Philippines. So I think these are the highlights of today's market movers. All right, okay, let's just get straight into it. If you look at the US today, one of the biggest positives that is happening in the US today is all the AI spending, all this talks of growth. The biggest question is it going to stop? And it looks
Yep.
like third quarter. I mean, if you look at it, it's still growing 19% year on year. In fact, 85% of all companies that have reported so far, in fact, by Tom Lee, which I follow very closely, and I think you guys all should too, is he's saying that 85% of companies that have reported are actually beating expectations. So that's how good earnings is. And you know, the ironical part is everybody thinks it's just happening on the top 20, top 30 stocks. But I think he also reported that if you look at the RUT, even on the RUT, growth was still steady at 40-45%. In fact, the RUT on the smaller caps were actually accelerating faster. Now, there are some sectors that are weak. I think we understand that. So if you think about it, you look at the RUT, people thought that there was not going to be any rotation, but there is. In fact, so far, 7 out of the 11 sectors were actually growing double digit. Don't get me wrong, there are some still weak sectors. I think we're still seeing it in some parts of the consumer. But nonetheless, overall, I think earnings season has been relatively healthy across the board. So this is the story. Despite the strong earnings, why are central banks still cutting?
Yes.
And I think if you look at the image on the left, Pael, this is the scary part. And this is what
Mm,
also scares me in the Philippines.
yes.
Because we're having record high earnings, yet the number of job cuts are skyrocketing. In fact, the job cuts that was released last night was the highest it has been in the last 2 years. And you'll see on that red bar there, this is a month, this is data recorded monthly. There was an 84% jump from last month's 84,000 recorded. So I don't know. Is this a sign of what's to come also for the rest of the world? Because if you look at it, this is the main reason why you continue to see central banks cut interest rates. In fact, there are only 3 countries on this list, Japan, Taiwan, and Brazil, that is still hiking, and everybody else is cutting interest rates. Inflation still remains elevated if you look at it across the board, but everybody's expecting that to head lower, largely because post-tariffs, everybody thinks that there is a problem going to happen on consumer demand. So I don't know, Pael. Are you feeling it, or what's your thoughts on this AI?
I think it's the Philippines, right? We're seeing that number then na at least comparing I'm actually reading it today na compared to the previous month, about 2 million Filipinos reported na unemployed, and then this year, at least this month, is 1.96 million. So we're seeing a slight improvement, but underemployment is actually climbing. So I think that speaks something with our employment here also in the Philippines. I don't know. Like, yan, diba? Like what happens sa US market? Usually it also spills down to the Philippines. It's something I'm also closely watching in the employment numbers.
You know what scares me is how fast it's happening.
The rate of it happening.
That's what scares me. If it's slowly adjusting, it gives time
Yeah.
for countries and
To
business
absorb
to
it.
adjust. It looks like what's happening right now is happening fast. So
Yeah.
I think this is something that 1 year's time, we might see a larger change from what we're talking about right now. But again, let's hope for the best.
I think it's also sakto with the next headline that we're facing, diba? Na, are we seeing that the reason why inflation is going down, it's because of the prices really adjusting, or the demand side of it? And is it because of that? So what can you say about the October inflation, Edmund?
Philippine inflation came out relatively steady. I don't think this is going to be a concern going forward. And I think one of the biggest concerns for the Philippine economy right now is the delay in the infrastructure spending.
Yeah.
We all know what's happening from the corruption and on the scandal that's been happening on the DPWH and other agencies. But more importantly, it's because it's stalling the disbursements. And please be reminded, we have 6 trillion pesos in budget this year and another 6 trillion budget for next year. And if there's going to be any delays in that disbursement, which it's likely happening, you're going to see that impact happen on the day-to-day lives of all Filipinos.
Actually, ito na nga lumabas. 3Q PHP GDP grew 4%, missing expectations of 5.2. which is 5.5 last quarter. That's a real-time update for everybody. A short question, Edmund. How significant is that GDP numbers in terms of the way we see it affect equity markets here in the Philippines, at least?
Let's just maybe separate market perception and the real
Yeah.
because how I always think is market perception is a leading indicator. So meaning because markets are already sitting at valuations that we always talk about it's cheap, we always have to make that expectation, the economy is going to follow.
Right.
And I think markets have priced that part in, that negative part in. Can there be more pricing in of negative economic data? For sure. Don't get me wrong. And I think this is exactly not coming as a surprise in 3Q GDP.
Right. Yes.
What I think people are waiting for is 2026. And if there's going to be any recovery in the economic growth of the Philippines, this AI story is the one that's disturbing me more than anything else, I'll be honest.
It's something to be excited about, pero wala kasi sa Philippines.
No, because we're human export capital of the world, right?
Yes.
So if somebody's going to be cut, you're going to see weaker domestic consumption and you're going to see weaker office market, property market.
Yeah.
I'm not scaring people. And I never want to scare people.
Yes.
I think it's just get prepared. I think that's just the message we're sending to everyone.
Speaking of consumption story, so consumer earnings for this Q3 just announced.
To be fair, 3Q absolute was not bad. I mean, aside from Emperador, which came out really, really weak, I think the younger generation doesn't drink alcohol as much.
Yeah.
But if you look at the weakness that's coming from Emperador, it was both coming from domestic and international. I don't know if this is a trend.
Well, there's a study, di ba? Nasabi yung mga Gen Z daw doesn't drink as much as the millennials and older generations.
Well, to be fair, I don't drink anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I drink a lot less now. Anyway, so
Anyway,
talk about Monde first. Monde also surprised me. 2Q was kind of a big concern because core net income on the APAC was weak. To be fair, APAC was still relatively down a bit in terms of core profits, but the meat alternative business first time showed a profit after a long period of time. I think it's the first quarterly profit over the last 4 years. So I don't know if it was because they were cutting costs. That's the reason why they outperform on that end. Nonetheless, I think there were some good notes that were also mentioned by Monde. They actually even mentioned that October sales were up double digit. So hopefully that's a good message for fourth quarter. I don't know if this is going to be applicable to everyone, but that's a good sign coming from Monde and URC. Now, for the others, you had URC. URC, although it was up single digit, 1.6%, largely because of a weak international, and domestic, I think, was still up 5%. With that being said, I think overall, if you look at operating income, it was also still up 3% for the third quarter of 2025. That was coming from a low base, so we were expecting a lot more. But nonetheless, growth is growth. And hopefully, URC shows a better performance coming from fourth quarter. I think the international sales is still a major concern. I think the biggest positive so far is Century Tuna. One of the biggest problems of Century Tuna coming from last quarter was their OEM segment. And we thought that was going to be a major concern. Now we've seen a recovery both from the branded side, which is Century Tuna, and also on the OEM export side, which was up 4% versus negative 17% on the prior quarter. So I think overall, CNPF still continues to be one of the better consumer companies, and it shows. Performance also shows. Last but not the least, I think, is DNL. DNL, don't be minded too much about the revenue growth because they're just usually a pass on from all the commodity input costs. And one of the biggest problems on the input cost was been coconut oil, right? And coconut oil is up 70% year to date. And that's the reason why, if you look at gross profit margins for DNL, they actually fell to a record low. And so the reason why they posted a 12% growth in net profit was largely because of the Batangas plant, which has an income holiday. They've been saying that this is the trough for margins because we've actually seen coconut prices decline to 2,470 as I speak today. Hopefully next few quarters are better. But I think the best sign so far coming from DNL was exports were actually grew 22% in the third quarter of 2025. So that was actually a major concern for me in the second quarter because you have the Batangas plant and exports kind of slowed down a bit in the second quarter. Now it's back to growth. Hopefully it continues for the rest of the year. Is the worst over? I think that's the biggest question. I really hope so. Now, I worry about the lack of spending also coming from this for next year's government budget. And we all know that a slowdown in the spending of government will definitely impact consumer spending. Part of it, why did consumer pick up in 3Q? I don't know. Maybe it's because of the next slide.
Ultimate question. Yeah.
if you look at 3Q25 earnings for DigiPlus, they said it declined 23% in 3Q. But I saw the headline, it was up 0.3%. So there could be a mistake happening on this end. But I guess the net income was the accurate part, where net income actually fell 50% to 1.7 billion. Now, with that being said, I think this is a fair number. If online gambling still makes close to 2 billion pesos a quarter, you're still looking at 8 billion a year schedule of free cash flow for DigiPlus. I think that's a great number to make money. You can't complain with 8 billion a year. Let's be honest. We'll see if this is sustained for the fourth quarter, whether gambling really stabilizes. I think you've seen minimal reaction also happen last couple of days, despite yesterday's news on earnings.
Yeah.
So I think most of it is also priced in. DigiPlus isn't that expensive, but from my point of view, we're always looking at it from a Philippine economy, and I think this is a good number. Maybe people start shifting out of gambling and start buying more super goods and eat something healthy,
especially coming Christmas season, huh?
And that's the thing, right? It's Christmas season. I'm really hoping the malls pick up. I mean, we're waiting for the mall segment to see, and from the department store end to see whether consumer was still healthy for 3Q. That's the part where we're still waiting for this earnings season.
So I guess that's it for our this week's market movers. Any expectations or wag na? Wag na tayo mag-expect.
Wag na tayo mag-expect pa.
Yeah.
Let's pray for the best.
That is it for this week's market movers. I hope you're enjoying the segment. And Edmund, thank you for sharing your expertise, and we'll see you in the next.
All right, bye guys.